They say a king who cannot sleep will not long sit upon his throne. The war had ended 13 months ago. The bodies burned, the treaties signed, the borders secured. But the dead never truly leave. Every night, when the candles guttered low and the palace fell silent, they came for him, dragged him to a place where fog swallowed screams, where black water remembered every life taken, every choice that couldn't be unmade. A witch's curse, simple, brutal, unbreakable. Every night the dead will find you, and they did. Healers tried, potions failed. The kingdom watched their alpha king waste away, hollow-eyed, haunted, slowly dying on his feet, until one afternoon, in a sunlit council chamber, he fell asleep on the shoulder of a woman no one had ever noticed before. And for 20 impossible minutes, the dead let him rest. Some curses can't be broken by magic. Some require something far more dangerous. They require hope. 30 minutes earlier, Brennan's knee had been swelling again. The stubborn old fool refused to come down to the infirmary. So Isolde had sent Briar up with a poultice and strict instructions. Make sure he actually applied it. Simple. Except the council's discussion had shifted to contaminated grain stores, and someone who'd recognized her as the infirmary herbalist had asked her opinion on treatment. Before she could process what was happening, she'd been waved forward to sit beside the king himself and explain proper fumigation techniques for moldy grain. Walking toward him had been the most terrifying 30 seconds of her life, her pulse a wild fluttering thing in her throat. King Caspian Valdris was absurdly tall, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested he could snap a man's spine without breaking a sweat. The sheer physical presence of him was crushing. The dark gray eyes that had locked onto her as she approached had made her forget how to make her legs work properly. She'd lowered herself onto the bench beside him, and she'd had to grip her hands together in her lap to keep them from shaking. His gaze was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, her chest, making it hard to pull in a full breath. It had been the most unnerving 2 minutes of her life, and then she'd seen it. The deep bruised shadows beneath his eyes, the hollow carved into his cheeks that shouldn't have been there on a man his age. The rumor said His Majesty never slept. Looking at him up close, Briar believed every word, but she had not expected his breathing to deepen as she spoke, or for his head to tip slowly until his temple came to rest against her shoulder. The moment his weight settled against her, the world narrowed. To the warmth of him soaking through her sleeve, the impossible reality that the Alpha King had just passed out. On a nobody herbalist, in front of his entire council. Panic arrived a beat later. What was she supposed to do? The silence spread like spilled water, and now every single person in the room was staring at her, with varying degrees of shock. Rylan Ashford, the king's beta, rose slowly from his seat and mouthed very clearly, "Whatever you do, do not move." Briar's eyes went wide. Easy for him to say. He didn't have a mountain of a warlord pinning him to a wooden bench, while needing to sneeze. She held her breath. The urge retreated. Barely, 20 minutes crawled by like 20 years. Her shoulder ached. Her spine had gone stiff. She stared straight ahead at the moth-eaten banner on the opposite wall and tried to think about anything other than the fact that the king's hair was softer than she'd expected. His weight only grew heavier as he sank deeper into sleep, and she sent Rylan a desperate, imploring look. The beta leaned forward slightly, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "The Alpha never sleeps." Briar blinked at mine. So long, it had been 20 minutes. A lifetime to her, maybe, but hardly what anyone would call a proper rest. She glanced down at the king, at the way sleep had softened the hard line of his mouth into something almost gentle. Something in her chest did an odd, uncomfortable twist. Fine. She could sit a little longer, eventually, after what genuinely felt like an hour. Rylan rose and gestured. A guard approached, moving with the exaggerated caution of a man trying not to wake a sleeping wolf, and together they eased the king back against his chair. The moment his weight lifted, Briar nearly sobbed with relief. Rylan waved her toward the door. She stood on shaking legs and fled. She made it maybe 2 minutes down the corridor before the beta caught up with her. "The king is already waking," Rylan said, low and urgent. Briar stared at him, wondering what she was meant to say to that. "My condolences," she offered. The look Rylan gave her suggested that was not the right thing to say. "What did you do?" he asked. "How did you manage it?" "Manage what?" How did you make him sleep? Breyer gaped at him. I didn't do anything. I just sat there. The beta's expression didn't shift, but the silence that followed felt far too heavy. People fall asleep sometimes, Breyer added, suddenly nervous. Not him, Rylan muttered. A chill crawled down her spine. Are the rumors true then, she asked. The ones that say he doesn't sleep. Rylan ignored the question. Stay in the castle, he said instead. Don't leave the grounds. I'll be in touch shortly. Wait, do you think... Breyer hesitated. Is he going to be angry? I don't know how the king will react, Rylan said quietly. So don't tell anyone what happened here. Understood. He left before she could respond. Breyer stood alone in the empty corridor, her pulse still racing, and felt the first cold flicker of genuine fear. She hadn't thought the king would be angry with her. It wasn't her fault he'd fallen asleep. But if he was embarrassed and looking for someone to blame, her stomach twisted. That night, she dreamed of being dragged to the executioner's block for crimes against the crown, specifically being the king's pillow. And not a very comfortable one either, the king said in her dream. Right before the axe fell, she woke with her heart pounding and her sheets twisted around her legs like a noose. The morning light was still gray and thin when someone knocked on her door. A guard stood in the corridor, his face carefully blank. You're being summoned, he said, by the king himself. The waiting room was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of old wood and anxiety. When Rylan stepped inside, Breyer's heart lurched into her throat. Miss Winterthorne, Rylan said, his voice calm, too calm. Thank you for waiting. Is it true I'm being summoned by the king? Breyer gulped. Almost, the beta replied. I've summoned you in his name. Would you be willing to sit with the king during a private meeting? He paused. An experiment, if you will. She stared at him. Why? It came out as a squeak. Rylan didn't answer. The walk to the king's office felt like a funeral march. Breyer's pulse hammered in her ears with every step. He's going to recognize me. He's going to remember. He's going to know I was the one who accidentally made him sleep like a baby in public somehow. Rylan stopped at a heavy oak door and pushed it open. The air was thick with old parchment, the narrow windows letting in only thin gray light that seemed to disha before it reached the corners. And behind the desk, head bent over a report, sat King Caspian Valdris. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the door opening, didn't acknowledge Rylan's presence, didn't so much as twitch when Breyer stepped inside. Does he know, she wondered? Does he remember what happened yesterday? Is he mad at me? Here, Rylan murmured, gesturing to a chair along the wall. The wood creaked beneath her weight as she sat, but the king kept reading, his face a mask of controlled focus. He paid her no attention. Breyer pressed her hands together in her lap. The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked. The king turned another page. Maybe he doesn't know, she thought. Maybe Rylan didn't tell him. 2 advisors entered, followed by a third. They spoke in low voices, and the king listened without looking up, asked questions in a low voice, made notes in the margins of his reports. Breyer watched the clock, counted the seconds. 10 minutes passed, then 10 more. The king's pen stilled on the page, just for a moment. A brief hesitation, like he'd lost his train of thought. Then he shook his head slightly and kept writing. Oh no, Breyer thought. 5 more minutes and Caspian's head dipped. It was subtle, just a slight forward tilt that he caught immediately. He blinked hard, pressed his fingers to his temple, and forced his attention back to the document in front of him. One of the advisors was speaking. The king nodded at something, but his eyes had gone slightly unfocused. Breyer's pulse roared in her ears. She couldn't look away. His head dipped again, slower this time, and he didn't catch it as quickly. His hand went slack around the pen. The advisor finished his sentence and waited for a response. The king's eyes closed. His head tipped forward, came to rest on his folded arms atop the desk, and his breathing deepened into something slow and steady and utterly impossibly peaceful. The room went silent. The advisors stared. One of them opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Another turned to look at Rylan with wide eyes. The beta stood motionless by the door, his gaze fixed on the king. What? One of the advisors whispered. What do we wait? Rylan said quietly. One of the advisors shifted his weight. The beta's gaze snapped to him, sharp and warning, and the man froze. Minutes crawled by, then an hour, then two. The advisors filtered out one by one, and the office fell into heavy silence. Just Briar, the beta, and the king. She didn't dare move. Finally, Ryland turned to her. "You can go," he said quietly. Briar stood on shaking legs and fled. She stumbled back to the infirmary, her mind a chaotic mess of half-formed fears. He fell asleep, twice, during meetings, and I was there both times. What if he thought she'd seen too much? What if falling asleep in front of his counsel was some kind of weakness he couldn't afford anyone to witness? Kings didn't just pass out at their desks. That wasn't normal, and she'd been there, she'd seen it. Isolde Graythorne was grinding something at the workbench when Briar pushed through the door. "What happened?" she asked, like she could read minds. Briar opened her mouth. No sound came out. "Briar," Isolde said, her voice sharpening. "Breathe. What happened?" "The king fell asleep." Briar managed. Isolde's eyebrows rose. "The beta brought me to his office and told me to sit there. And I sat in a chair and didn't move. And the king was working. And then he passed out," Briar said. "It happened yesterday too. He fell asleep on my shoulder." Her voice cracked. "What if he's angry I saw that?" "Briar," Isolde said, moving around the workbench. "Relax. Sit down." "I can't sit down. I need to." "Sit," Isolde commanded. Briar sat. Isolde crossed to the door, glanced into the corridor, then shut it firmly. "What I'm about to tell you does not leave this room," she said. Briar's stomach dropped. "That's never a good start," she whined. "The rumors are true," Isolde continued. "The king doesn't sleep. Not properly. Not for more than a few minutes at a time. It's been this way since he returned from the Greystone War. Over a year now." "A year," Briar gasped. 13 months, Isolde corrected. "We've tried everything. Every herb in my stores, every potion, every remedy I know." Her mouth thinned into a hard line. "Nothing works." He closes his eyes, and something drags him back within minutes, every single time. Briar's mind reeled. "That's not possible. A year without sleep would kill." "A normal man, yes," Isolde said, her gaze sharpening. "He's an alpha, a shifter. That's kept him alive this long. But even he has limits. The beta fears he won't survive another 6 months. He's been helping the king hide this from court. But..." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Briar's feet. "But he slept yesterday," she whispered. "For almost an hour." "And today?" Isolde asked. 2 hours, Briar said. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. "What herbs were you working with yesterday?" Isolde asked suddenly, "for the council meeting. What were you carrying on your person?" Briar blinked at the abrupt shift. "I willow bark, the poultice for Counselor Brennan's knee. Some dried lavender I'd been sorting earlier in the day." "Nothing unusual? Why?" Isolde shook her head. "And today, what were you carrying today?" "Nothing," Briar said. "I wasn't working with anything." Isolde moved to her shelves. "Scent-based sedatives are rare, but they exist. If something in your natural scent, or perhaps a residue from the herbs you handle regularly." "Wait," Briar said, her voice strangled. "So you think he fell asleep because of me?" Isolde paused, turned to look at her. "Don't you?" she asked. Briar bit her lip. She'd rather hoped she'd been at the wrong place at the wrong time. But now that Isolde said it out loud, she realized that's what the beta thought. That's why he'd brought her to the office today. "Oh, gods," Briar whispered. A knock sounded at the door. They both froze. Isolde opened it to reveal Ryland standing in the corridor. "Miss Winterthorne," Ryland said politely. "A word, please." Briar's legs felt like water as she stepped outside. "The king woke less than a minute after you left his office," Ryland announced. The implications settled over her like a physical weight. "Like yesterday," she said. Ryland's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Does the king know?" she asked. "Oh yes," Ryland said calmly. "He knows, and he's requiring your presence, tonight, at sunset, in his private chambers." Briar's stomach dropped. That evening, a guard led Briar through corridors she'd never walked before. The upper levels of the palace, where nobles kept their chambers, and servants knew better than to linger. "Why am I being summoned to his rooms?" she thought. The possibilities spiraled through her mind. and her thoughts took a sharp, mortifying turn. What if he wanted her in his bed? She shook her head. No, absolutely not. Kings didn't summon random herbalists for that, but she couldn't help it. She imagined him asking her to unlace her dress, his voice low and commanding. His hands. Briar's face burned. The guard stopped at a set of carved wooden doors and knocked once. "Enter," came the king's voice from inside. The king's chambers were the largest room she had ever stood in. Weapons hung on the walls, swords, a bow, a shield bearing the Valdris crest, and in the center of it all, impossible to ignore, the bed. It was enormous, and the sight of it made Briar's stomach drop, because it was his bed, and she was standing 5 feet away from it, and she had no idea why. He was standing by the window, but hearing her arrive, he turned. "Your Majesty, I'm so sorry." Briar exclaimed, "I promise I won't tell anyone you fell asleep on my shoulder." The king frowned. "What?" he asked. "I mean," Briar barreled on, "I did tell Isolde, but she already knew you had trouble sleeping because she's a healer, and I did not tell her you sort of drooled." There was a beat of absolute silence. Then the king cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said, looking distinctly uncomfortable. It was the first time he'd addressed her directly. His voice was lower than she'd expected, quieter, and it sent a shiver down her spine. Another beat of silence. He crossed his arms. The movement drew her attention to the breadth of his shoulders. "This is a practical arrangement," he said, his tone clipped. "No one speaks of this outside these rooms. Is that understood?" Briar nodded mutely, wondering what exactly was the arrangement. "Sire, I'm not—" She flushed, heat crawling up her neck. He frowned. "You're not what—" "I'm saving myself for marriage," Briar blurted out, her voice coming out louder and more defensive than she'd intended. The king blinked at her, slowly. "What do you think is going to happen here?" he asked. Briar opened her mouth, closed it, had absolutely no idea what to say, and it must have shown on her face because he added, sounding almost startled, "You'll sleep here. I'll sleep here, that's all." Briar's gaze dropped. At the foot of the massive bed, someone had set up a narrow pallet, with a thin pillow and a blanket that looked borrowed from the servants' quarters. "Oh," she said, her voice small. Of course, she thought. He's the king, he could have anyone, someone beautiful, someone appropriate. She wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Briar moved to the pallet and knelt down, smoothing the blanket with quick, practiced movements. "What time do you retire, Your Majesty?" she asked. "When I can no longer avoid it," he replied. "And do you have a preference for candlelight or dark?" she asked. Not looking up. "Dark." His voice came from closer than she'd expected. She glanced up and found he'd moved to the other side of the bed. "Would you like the fire banked?" she asked. He sighed, and the sound was so bone-deep tired it made her chest ache. "No." Briar nodded and sat back on her heels, unsure what to do with her hands. With herself. The king crossed to the bed and sat on the edge of it. The mattress dipped under his weight. Briar watched his hands settle on his thighs, watched the way his shoulders stayed rigid even sitting down. "You're not even going to remove your jacket?" she asked. His gaze cut to her, sharp and unreadable. Briar nodded quickly. "That's fine. You do you, sire." Something flickered across his face, the ghost of amusement, but it was gone before she could name it. He lay back on the bed, boots and all, and stared at the ceiling. Briar stood and moved to the candles. Her hands shook as she pinched out the flames one by one. The room dimmed. She lay down on the pallet, her back rigid, her hands folded on her stomach, and tried not to think about the fact that she could hear him breathing. Deep, controlled breaths, in and out, steady and deliberate. Minutes passed, she counted them, tried to focus on the rhythm of the fire crackling. Briar stared at the ceiling and tried to relax. Failed completely. More minutes passed. The king's breathing changed. It was subtle, a slight deepening, a loosening in the rhythm. Briar turned her head carefully and looked toward the bed. His hand had gone slack against the mattress. The rigid tension in his shoulders had eased. He was asleep. 20 minutes. That's all it had taken. The fire crackled, casting shifting light across his face, and Briar couldn't look away. He was beautiful. The fire burned lower, the light shifted from gold to amber to deep red. His breathing stayed steady. Briar watched the rise and fall of his chest and felt something settle in her own, a strange sort of wonder. She was still watching him when his breathing changed again. not deeper, rougher. Briar sat up, her pulse spiking. The king's head turned sharply to one side. His hands clenched into fists against the sheets. A low sound escaped his throat, and his entire body went rigid. He was having a nightmare. Briar scrambled to her feet on instinct and reached for his shoulder without thinking. "Your Majesty." She blinked, and when her eyes opened, she was somewhere else, somewhere cold, surrounded by fog, thick and gray and utterly still, pressing in from all sides. The air smelled of damp stone and ash. Trees surrounded her, but they weren't right. Too tall, too skeletal, their branches reaching like fingers against the white sky. "Where am I?" The words came out as a whisper. The silence was suffocating. No wind, no bird song, nothing. Except something moved in the fog. A presence, patient, hungry, aware. "Hello," Briar called out, her heart hammering. Her voice disappeared into the fog like it had been swallowed. Briar turned. The king stood 10 feet away, staring into the fog, at the thing she couldn't see. His face was expressionless, but his hands were clenched at his sides, his knuckles white. "Your Majesty," Briar called out. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge her. "Your Majesty." She took a step toward him, panic rising in her throat. The thing in the fog was closer now. She could hear it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming through the trees. The king didn't react. Briar grabbed his hand and pulled. She blinked, and they were back. The king's chambers, the dying fire, the warm amber light. Briar was standing beside the bed, her hand still on the king's arm. He was asleep beside her, his breathing steady again, his face peaceful, like nothing had happened. She pulled her hand back slowly, racing pulse thrumming in her temples, and stared down at him. What just happened? She wondered out loud. A rhythm formed. In the mornings, Briar woke before Caspian, or at least she tried to, but she found herself lingering longer each day, watching him sleep in the gray dawn light. She'd slip out before he woke, dress quietly, and return to the infirmary before the palace stirred. During the days she did not see him. Their lives did not overlap. He ruled a kingdom. She treated burns and stomach complaints and sprained ankles. In the evening, she arrived at his chambers after the palace had settled, set up her things on the narrow bed that had replaced the pallet, and tried to make conversation. He mostly ignored her, or replied in grunts. Then they slept. No more nightmares, no more strange dreams of foggy places and patient, hungry things in the dark. Nothing strange, though a candle did appear on the table nearest her bed, and now the fire was always stoked before she got there. "Thank you for the candle," she said one evening as she unpinned her hair. The king glanced up from the report he was reading. "What candle? The one you leave burning for me." His ears went slightly pink, and Briar bit back a smile. Later she could hear him awake in the dark, making the sound of someone whose body refused to cooperate, no matter how desperately it needed rest. So without really deciding to, Briar started talking, not about anything important. She told him about the apprentice who'd mixed up the yarrow and the feverfew last year, and given a guardsman a poultice that turned his arm temporarily purple. She didn't know when he stopped shifting and fell asleep, but in the morning he asked, "The apprentice, the one with the purple arm, did the color fade?" Briar stared at him. He'd been listening. He remembered. 3 days, she said, but the apprentice got in so much trouble. Caspian was quiet for a moment. Then, "The apprentice was, you wasn't it?" he asked. Briar froze. "What? No, I would never." He just looked at her, one eyebrow raised slightly. "Yes," she admitted. "Yes, it was me, but in my defense," the king began to laugh. Briar stared at him, startled and transfixed. Then she smiled. By day 14, they were talking more easily. Small things, favorite foods, childhood memories, his preference for morning training sessions, her obsession with cataloging every herb in Isolde's collection. It felt normal, which was terrifying in its own way, because normal wasn't what this was. This was the Alpha King, and a foundling herbalist, sleeping in the same room night after night, and somehow, it was working. He was sleeping 90 minutes now, sometimes 2 hours. Color was returning to his face, the hollows in his cheeks filling out. Rylan reported the change to Isolde, who smiled and said nothing. Briar tried not to think about what it meant. that her presence was healing him, or that leaving would kill them both. The nightmare came without warning. One moment Caspian was asleep, breathing steady. The next his entire body went rigid, his hands fisted in the sheets, his head thrashing. A sound tore from his throat, raw and agonized. Briar was on her feet before she'd made the conscious decision to move. "Your Majesty," she reached for his shoulder. The moment her hand made contact, the world tilted. She was back in the fog, but this time it was worse. The silence wasn't just absence of sound. It was weight, pressing down on her lungs, making it hard to breathe. The fog moved with intention, reaching, curling around her ankles like hands. No, not again. Briar spun, looking for him. Caspian stood 20 feet away, staring at something in the mist. His face was pale, his eyes wide with horror. Caspian. She didn't use his title, didn't think about protocol. He didn't respond. Briar ran to him, grabbed his arm. "We have to go, now." But he didn't move. His gaze was fixed on something ahead. And when Briar followed his line of sight, she saw it. A lake or a pond, black water, smooth as glass, stretching out into the foam. And in it, something was moving. She squinted and gasped. It was a wolf sinking into the dark water, struggling, its movements growing weaker, not just one, 2, 3 more. Briar's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Caspian, then back at the wolves drowning in the black water. "We should go," she said. Reaching for his arm, he didn't respond. One of the wolves shifted, the terrible agonizing transformation from beast to human, and a hand broke the surface, reached toward the king. "Please," the voice said, distorted and desperate, shocked. Briar grabbed Caspian's hand and pulled. She woke gasping, wrenching upright in the dark, blood roaring in her ears, sweat cooled on her skin. She was back in the king's chambers, and beside her. Caspian was awake. He was sitting up, looking at her, and there was something in his expression, something straight and resigned, that made her chest tighten. "Bad dream?" he asked quietly. Briar pushed her hair from her face. Fog, black water, trees that were wrong, something in the dark. She swallowed hard. "Did you see it too?" He froze, frowned, shook his head. "What?" he asked eventually. "You were there," Briar said, the words tumbling out. "In my dream, it felt not like a dream, like a place, an actual place. And you were there. And it's not the first time." Caspian's face went pale. "You've been there before." He looked shocked, appalled even. "Yes, She paused. "You've been there too. It's where you go, isn't it? It's why you don't sleep." He moved away, swung his legs over the side of the bed and put his head in his hands. She knew she was right. "Why didn't you say anything?" Briar demanded, her voice rising. "The healers, the council, Rylan, they've all been trying to help. I've been trying to help. You should have said." "It wouldn't have changed anything," he interrupted, his voice flat. Briar clenched her fists in the sheets. "You don't know that. I've been able to follow you there too, haven't I? With this information, we can..." He flinched. "You should go," he said. The words cut through the air like a blade. Briar stared at him. "You want me to go?" She watched the line of his shoulders. The tension coiled in his back. "Go," Caspian said again, still not looking at her. "I didn't think..." He paused. "I don't want you getting stuck in that place too." "I wasn't stuck," Briar began. "But what if you are..." He turned to face her finally. "What if instead of helping me, you're being contaminated by me? What if I pull you in and you can't get out?" She shook her head, reaching for him. "Your Majesty, you don't know that." "Go," he said. She tried to touch him, but his hand shot out, catching her wrist. "It's an order, he said, meeting her eyes. "Leave." The word came out as a roar, echoing off the stone walls. Briar flinched back like she'd been struck. For a moment they stared at each other across the bed. Then she fled. She grabbed her robe with shaking hands and ran from the room, his rejection ringing in her ears. The door slammed shut behind her. In the empty corridor, she pressed her back against the cold stone wall and tried to breathe through the ache in her chest. He'd sent her away. To protect her, maybe. But he'd sent her away all the same, and she had no idea how to fix this. It had been 7 days since Caspian had ordered her out of his chambers. 7 nights since she'd slept in his bed, felt his warmth beside her, heard his breathing steady in the dark. 7 days of nothing. She hadn't been let inside his rooms again, hadn't seen him anywhere either. It was like he'd vanished entirely, and the palace felt colder for his absence. Briar was worried, because if he wasn't sleeping, if he was back in that terrible place every night with no one to pull him out, she couldn't finish the thought. Briar found Isolde in the infirmary's back room, grinding dried valerian root with practiced efficiency. "There's something you should know," Briar said, closing the door behind her. "About the king." Isolde looked up. "Go on." "He goes somewhere at night. A place," Briar said, the words tumbling out. "A strange, foggy place. I've been there too. Twice now. The air smells like damp stone and there's this oppressive silence, and the bike swallows everything." She took a breath. "It feels like death, Isolde. That place feels like death." Isolde was quiet for a long moment. "It sounds like a curse, mostly," she decided. Briar blinked at her. "A curse? You think magic takes him to this place?" "It takes his mind, not him," Isolde said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You don't see him disappear at night. Do you? It sounds like a mind prison, and that sounds like magic to me." She paused, studying Briar. "What's strange is that you've traveled there too. Any idea why that is?" "No," Briar said too quickly. She didn't want to talk about the pull she felt for him, the ache of his absence in her chest, or the way he'd scented her that morning, the desperate hunger in it. She didn't want to be told she was imagining things that weren't there. So Briar didn't talk about it, but her body betrayed her anyway. She became restless in his absence. Her wolf, quiet and docile her entire life, was suddenly agitated. She couldn't settle, couldn't focus, couldn't breathe properly. The migraine started and she had to work with the curtains drawn, the room dim and closed. Then came the weight, a crushing heaviness in her chest. And beneath it all, a constant gnawing anxiety that had no name and no cure. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, a flash of dark hair across the courtyard, his tall frame unmistakable, even at a distance. But he never looked at her, never made eye contact, never acknowledged her presence at all. And so the ache got worse. By day 21, she could barely stand upright. Counselor Brennan sent for her that afternoon, his knee again, swelling and painful. Briar gathered the necessary supplies. Each movement took more effort than it should. The corridor seemed to stretch longer than usual as she made her way to the council chambers. The door was open. She could hear voices inside. Brennan's gravelly tone complaining. Ryland's measured responses. And beneath it all, a voice that made her heart lurch with desperate relief. Caspian. Briar paused in the doorway. Wait, he was there, at the head of the long table, surrounded by maps and correspondence. She took a breath and stepped inside. "Your medicine counselor," she said. She crossed toward Brennan, acutely aware of Caspian's presence to her left. She glanced at him as she passed. He didn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on the document in front of him, his jaw tight, his posture rigid, like she wasn't there at all. The ache in her chest intensified. Briar reached Brennan's eye and set down her supplies on the table with a soft clink of glass against wood. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the compress. She could feel Caspian across the room, could sense every breath he took, but he wouldn't look at her. She tried again, lifting her gaze as she worked, willing him to meet her eyes. Nothing. He turned the page. The weight in her chest grew heavier. Her vision swam slightly at the edges, gray creeping in. The room felt too warm suddenly, the air too thick. "Counselor, if you'll just..." she started, reaching for his knee. The world tilted. It happened fast. Her vision went white at the edges, then gray, then black. She heard the tincture bottle hit the floor. She heard her name. Briar, sharp and alarmed and utterly devastated, in a voice she would know anywhere. Then she was falling, and the world was disappearing. And strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. She felt herself being pulled against a solid chest, felt hands cradling her head, felt the frantic thunder of a heartbeat beneath her ear. She woke to the smell of dried herbs and linen. The infirmary. She was in the infirmary. Briar blinked, trying to orient herself. and froze. Caspian sat beside her bed, his head in his hands. When he heard her stir, he looked up, and the relief that flooded his face was so profound it stole her breath. "You're awake," he said, his hands hovering like he wanted to touch her, but didn't dare. Briar stared at him, confusion and surprise warring in her chest. "Your Majesty, I—" He was on his feet immediately, leaning over her. "What's wrong? Have you not been eating? Are you ill?" His gray eyes swept over her face, searching. Then he turned to glare at Isolde, who stood near the doorway. "The head healer wouldn't say anything," he said tersely. "Doctor-patient confidentiality." Isolde confirmed. Caspian's growl was low and dangerous. "I deserve to know what's wrong with my—" He stopped himself, his jaw clenching. "With Briar." He turned back to her. "Have you woken up there again, in the hollow? In the what?" Briar blinked. "It's what I call the place." Caspian started. "The foggy place." Briar frowned. "Well, I suppose the hollow sounds better." Caspian snorted, but he still looked worried. "Have you woken up there?" he insisted. Isolde looked curious too, her sharp gaze fixed on Briar's face. Briar didn't want to lie, but he wouldn't tell her anything, wouldn't let them help. He'd been keeping this secret. And look where it had gotten them, her passed out on a council room floor. Him looking like he hadn't slept in days. It wasn't nice to lie, but, I mean, maybe, she said, adding the saddest pout she could manage. "I'm not sure, it's all a blur." Caspian's face fell. Behind them, Isolde, who wasn't buying it, mouthed sneaky to Briar. "I knew it," the king said. "This is all my fault." Isolde jumped in smoothly. "Your Majesty, perhaps now would be a good time to finally tell us. The healers who've been looking for a way to help you, about this hollow." When Caspian looked defensive, she added, her tone gentle but firm, "For poor Briar's sake, if anything." Caspian sank back, his shoulders dropping, the fight going out of him, and then, finally, he told them everything. "The steel claw pack," he said, his voice low and controlled, each word carefully measured. "A rogue settlement on our borders, led by an alpha named Darius, who believed the throne had abandoned the borderlands, and he and his people kept attacking, raiding villages, killing innocents." His hands clenched into fists. "I tried to negotiate a treaty. It failed. Darius wanted blood." He paused, swallowing hard. "So there was blood, there was war." He sighed, his jaw tight enough that Briar could see the muscle jumping beneath the skin. "I ordered a march on the Steel Claw settlement, because every other option had been exhausted. There was a battle." Another pause, heavier this time, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "There was so much blood." "Is that where Darius lost his life?" Isolde asked. "Yes," Caspian said, not looking at either of them. "I offered him surrender. He wouldn't hear it." Briar watched his face, saw the weight of it pressing down on him. "There was a witch," he continued, "Morgana, Darius's mother. She cursed me, spat it through blood and broken teeth." He looked up finally, met Briar's eyes. "Every night the dead will find you." Briar gaped at him. "Wait, so you knew? You knew you couldn't sleep because of some curse? Why didn't you tell us?" "Because it wouldn't have changed anything," Caspian said, his voice rough, his jaw was tight enough to crack. Briar reached out and took his hand, wrapping her fingers around his. Isolde stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "I know of this witch. I know of these types of curses. The magic isn't that strong, or shouldn't be. It should have broken by now. Or at least, it shouldn't make you so sick that you can't sleep at all." She frowned, her fingers tapping against her crossed arms. "Strange that it's still going." Briar squeezed his hand. "Let me help, please. Let us help." Caspian shook his head, pulling his hand gently from hers. "I'll do my best to fight the curse, but I won't have you sleep near me," he said. "I won't risk pulling you into that place again." "But," Briar started. "No," he said, his voice firm. He stood, putting distance between them, his expression shuddering closed. "I won't argue about this." He turned and left the infirmary without looking back. Isolde waited until his footsteps had faded down the corridor. Before turning to Briar with a knowing look, one eyebrow raised. "Lying about having nightmares," she said mildly. "Crafty." Briar had the grace to look guilty. He wouldn't let us help otherwise. She defended. You're much the same. He and you, Isolde observed. Briar startled, because Isolde was comparing her to a king. What do you mean, she asked. You've been sick too, Shaw. Don't think I haven't noticed, Isolde said. I'm not sick, just slightly, Briar tried. You passed out, Isolde interrupted flatly. Briar shut her mouth. Into the arms of your king, no less, Isolde continued, who brought you here growling at everyone who tried to approach. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what's going on here. Briar's pulse quickened. And what would you say is going on, Mistress Isolde? You share a bond, she replied. You and him, an incomplete one, pulling you together. The harder you resist, the harder it will pull. Briar's face burned. No, but he doesn't want me. He doesn't want me sleeping beside him, she protested. Isolde rolled her eyes and leaned back in the chair. Because he seeks to protect you from his curse. Uselessly, might I add. The bond is forming, whether either of you accepts it or not. But if his curse isn't stopped, he'll die. She paused, letting the words sink in. And because of the growing bond you share with him, you'll die too. Briar stared at her and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known was there. What do I do? She whispered. Isolde's expression softened. You choose, she said simply. You can leave, save yourself, or you can stay and fight for both of you. Briar didn't hesitate. I stay. Briar stood outside the king's chambers, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Rylan had escorted her here without explanation, without asking if she wanted to come. Just a firm hand on her shoulder and a quiet, he needs you. Which didn't make sense, because Caspian had made it very clear he didn't want her anywhere near him. The beta knocked once, opened the door, and gently pushed her inside, then left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Briar stood frozen in the middle of the room. Caspian was by the window, his back to her. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, but the light couldn't reach him. He looked, diminished, shoulders hunched, head bowed, like the weight of the world was crushing him. You shouldn't be here, he said, without turning around. Briar's hands clenched at her sides. Rylan brought me. I'll speak to him. Don't. She took a step forward. He's worried about you. We all are. Caspian's laugh was bitter. Worried, that's rich. Another step. You look terrible. That made him turn. His eyes were bloodshot, the shadows beneath them so dark they looked like bruises. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, which, of course, he hadn't. Thank you for that observation, he said dryly. Briar crossed her arms. When was the last time you ate? I don't remember. When was the last time you slept? His jaw tightened. You know the answer to that. 7 days. 7 days since he'd sent her away. This is killing you, she said quietly. Better me than you. The words hit her like a slap. Briar took another step, then another, until she was standing right in front of him, close enough to see the exhaustion carved into every line of his face, close enough to smell the cedar and smoke scent of him, that her wolf had been crying for. If you want me gone, she said, her voice steady despite the fear racing through her, then make me go. Caspian stared at her, his hands fisted at his sides, like he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. No, his voice cracked. You don't. That place, the hollow, it's hell, Briar. And if you get trapped there, if I pull you in and you can't get out, then we'll face it together. I won't let you die because of me. Briar reached up, placed her hand against his cheek. He flinched, but didn't pull away. And I won't let you die alone, she whispered. For a long moment, they just stood there, his eyes closed, his face pressed into her palm, like she was the only thing keeping him upright. I can't, he breathed. You can. I don't deserve. Stop, she said it firmly. Stop deciding what you deserve. Let me choose. His eyes opened, gray and storm dark and full of something that made her chest ache. Why, he asked, raw and broken. Why would you choose this? Briar smiled, small and sad and true. Because someone has to. They sat on opposite sides of his bed, the fire crackling between them. Neither of them had moved to sleep yet. Briar could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. "You knew," she said finally, "about the bond." It wasn't a question. Caspian's hands gripped his knees. "Yes." "For how long?" A pause. "Since the council meeting, the first day." Briar's breath caught. "That long." He nodded. "I thought I was going insane at first. Your scent was everywhere, in the halls, in my chambers, in my sleep." His voice dropped. "I'd wake up reaching for you, and you wouldn't be there. And it felt like I was dying." Briar's throat tightened. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I didn't want this for you." He turned to look at her finally. "You're young, you have your whole life ahead of you. And I'm broken, cursed, a king who can't even sleep without help." "You're not broken." "I killed people, Briar, innocent people, in a war you didn't start. That doesn't change what I did." She shifted closer to him on the bed. "No, it doesn't. But it also doesn't make you unworthy of this." She gestured between them. Caspian's laugh was hollow. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying. You deserve better than—" "Let me decide what I deserve," Briar interrupted, her voice sharp. "I've spent my whole life being told what I'm worth, where I belong, what I should accept." She reached for his hand. "Don't you do it too." His fingers curled around hers, tight and desperate. "I'm afraid," he admitted. So quietly she almost didn't hear it. "Of what?" "That I'll hurt you, that the curse will take you, that you'll see what I've done and realize I'm not worth saving." Briar squeezed his hand. "I've already seen it. Remember, I've been in the hollow. I've seen the dead." She paused. "And I'm still here." Caspian's breath shuddered out of him. "Why, Tana?" "Because," she smiled, "someone has to choose you. Might as well be me." A new rhythm formed, slower this time, more careful. They slept in the same bed now, not touching at first, just close. Close enough that Briar could hear him breathing. Close enough that her wolf finally stopped pacing. By day 26, they were holding hands, fingers intertwined in the dark, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. A small gesture, but it felt like everything. During the days, Briar worked in the infirmary, and in the evening she came to his chambers. Sometimes they talked about small things, favorite seasons, childhood memories, the way he'd learned to fight at 8 years old, the way she'd learned to identify poisonous plants at 6. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just sat together by the fire, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, comfortable in the silence. On day 28, he told her about the war, not the battles, not the strategy, but the cost. "There was a village," he said, staring into the flames, "on the border, caught between us and Darius's forces." Briar waited. "We tried to evacuate them, but Darius got there first, used them as shields." His voice went flat. "We had to choose, let them die or retreat and lose the territory." "What did you do?" "We advanced." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. "Some of them survived," he continued. "Most didn't." Briar took his hand. "You made an impossible choice." "I made the choice a king makes, not a good man." "Maybe they're the same things sometimes." He looked at her then, like he wanted to believe her, but couldn't quite manage it. On day 30, Isolde called Briar to the infirmary. "Sit," the older woman commanded. Briar sat. Isolde studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "You look better." "I feel better. The bond is settling." It wasn't a question. Briar nodded. He's trying. We're trying." Isolde's expression softened. "Good. That's good." She paused. "But the curse hasn't broken." "No, it won't. Not until he forgives himself." Briar sighed. "I don't know how to help him do that." "You can't," Isolde said gently. "That's his work, not yours." She leaned forward. "But you can stand beside him while he does it, and sometimes that's enough." Then she did something unexpected. She pulled Briar into a hug. "You're doing well, child," she murmured against Briar's hair. "I'm proud of you." Briar's eyes burned, because Isolde had never said that before. "Thank you," she whispered. When they pulled apart, Isolde's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now go. Your king is waiting." Briar woke to gray light and the smell of ash. Wrong. This was wrong. She sat up quickly and froze. She wasn't in Caspian's chambers. She was in the hollow. The fog pressed in from all sides, thick and suffocating. And beside her, Caspian. He was sitting up too, his face pale. "No," he breathed. "No, you shouldn't be here." "Where are we?" But she already knew. His hand found hers in the mist. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." Briar stood, pulling him with her. "It's okay. We'll wake up, like before." Except something was different this time. The hollow felt solid, real in a way it hadn't been before, and when Briar tried to pull them out, to yank them back to waking, nothing happened. They were stuck. "Caspian," fear crept into her voice. He pulled her close. "Stay with me. Don't let go." They walked through the foam, hand in hand, until the trees opened up into a clearing, and Briar's breath stopped. The field of dead, hundreds of them, soldiers in torn uniforms, civilians with wounds that would never heal, children. Oh gods, children. They stood silent at first, just watching, and at the edge of the clearing, a lake, black water, smooth as glass, and in it, shapes moving, sinking, wolves in human form, drowning slowly in the dark. Caspian made a sound, low and agonized, and sank to his knees. Every night, the same nightmare. They'd fall asleep holding each other and wake in the hollow. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for what felt like hours. The dead never moved closer, but they watched, always watching. And the voices started on day 34. Whispers at first, then louder. "You should have saved us. A better king would have seen. Our blood is on your hands." Caspian would kneel in the gray dirt and take it, all of it. Briar tried to pull him away, but he wouldn't move. "They're right," he'd say. And Briar wanted to scream, because they weren't right. They weren't even real. She realized it on day 37, when one of the soldiers spoke, and it was Caspian's voice. Not exactly, but close enough. "You failed us." Caspian's own words, his own guilt, given form. "They're not real," she told him. He didn't seem to hear her. "Caspian, listen to me. They're not real. They're you, your guilt. That's all." He finally looked at her. "Does it matter?" "Yes, because you can't fight ghosts, but you can fight yourself." His laugh was broken. "I've been fighting myself for 13 months. I'm losing." Briar grabbed his face between her hands. "Then let me help you fight." The dead parted, like a curtain being drawn back, and she walked through. A young woman, 19, maybe 20, dark hair, soft eyes, a wound in her chest that bled and never stopped. In her hands, a white cloth, surrender. Caspian went rigid. "No." The woman tilted her head, smiled, sad and knowing. "Hello, Your Majesty." Her voice was wrong, layered, like 100 voices speaking at once. "Leora." Caspian's voice broke on the name. Briar's hand tightened on his. "Who is she?" But Caspian couldn't answer, because the hollow was showing her. Images flashing through her mind. A battlefield at dawn, smoke and screams, and through it all, a figure running, young, female, holding a white cloth high, calling out, "Peace, please, peace." Crossfire. Someone shouts a warning, too late. She falls, and Caspian is there, catching her, holding her as the light fades from her eyes. "I'm sorry," he says, over and over. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Briar gasped. The vision released her. Leora stood before them, still smiling that terrible, sad smile. "You remember me." "I never forgot," Caspian whispered. "Good." She took a step closer. "You carry me, all of us, every day." "Yes." "Why?" The question hung in the air. Caspian's hand shook. "Because I deserve to." "Do you?" "Yes." Leora's head tilted the other way. "Or is it easier to punish yourself than to forgive?" Caspian flinched, like she'd struck him. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Then why are you still breathing?" No answer. Briar watched the exchange, her heart breaking. Because Leora wasn't attacking him. She was asking. The same questions Briar wanted to ask, but didn't know how. "You could have died," Leora said. "In the battle. In the months after, you could have let the curse take you. She gestured to Briar, but you didn't. You fought. Why? Caspian's gaze slid to Briar. I don't know. Liar. The word cracked like a whip, and Leora's smile vanished. You know exactly why. You just won't say it. She leaned in close. Because saying it means admitting you want to live. And if you want to live, then you have to forgive yourself. And you don't know how. Briar's breath caught. Because Leora was right. Caspian looked away. I can't. Can't or won't. Both, Leora straightened. Then you'll die here. And she'll die with you. She gestured to Briar. Is that what you want? No. Then choose. It's not that simple. It is. Leora's voice softened. It really is. You just have to say it. Caspian shook his head. And the ghost, the manifestation, whatever she was, sighed. Then I'll see you tomorrow night, and the night after, and the night after that. She turned, began to walk away. Until the curse takes you both. Isolde burst into the infirmary workroom, where Briar was grinding valerian root. Badly, her hands kept shaking. I found it, Isolde said. Briar looked up. Found what? The answer, the reason the curse won't break. She spread papers across the table. Old texts, research notes, scribbled diagrams. Morgana's curse was simple, basic, a nightmare hex, should have faded in weeks. Isolde's finger tapped the parchment. But it didn't, because it's not just her magic anymore. Briar leaned in. What do you mean the curse is a seed? Isolde explained. Morgana planted it, but Caspian is feeding it. With his guilt, his self-hatred, his belief that he deserves punishment. She looked up, met Briar's eyes. The magic is parasitic. It feeds on the host's emotions, grows stronger the more they believe they deserve it. So it's not really the curse keeping him from sleeping. It's both. The curse creates the hollow, but his guilt traps him there. Briar sank into a chair. How do we break it? He has to forgive himself. That's what Leora said. Isolde's eyebrows rose. Leora, a ghost, in the hollow, except she's not really a ghost. She's him, his guilt-given form. Briar rubbed her face. She keeps asking why he won't let go, and he says he can't, that he doesn't know how. Isolde was quiet for a moment. Forgiveness isn't knowledge, it's choice. What? He doesn't need to know how to forgive himself. He needs to choose to, despite not knowing how. That doesn't make sense. It does, Isolde said gently. You don't heal because you understand your wounds. You heal because you decide to, even when you don't know the way. Briar thought about that, about her own ghosts, the parents who'd left her, the worthlessness she'd carried. Could she just choose to let it go? I don't know if he can, she said finally. Then you'll have to show him. Word spread through the court that the king was struggling. They didn't know about the curse, but they knew about Briar, the foundling herbalist who slept in his chambers. Some called her his mistress. Others, his weakness. Brennan put an end to that on day 50, in the middle of a council session, when Lord Halverton made a snide comment about inappropriate attachments. Brennan stood, slow and deliberate, and looked at Halverton with eyes that had seen 68 years of politics. You want to talk about inappropriate, he asked, voice cutting through the room. Then let's talk about how you profited from the war, selling grain at triple the price while families starved. Halverton went pale. Or we can talk about the king. Brennan continued, who made the hardest choices any of us will ever have to make, who carries the weight of those choices every single day. He paused. And the woman who helps him carry it, who asks for nothing, expects nothing, and gives everything. His gaze swept the room. If that's inappropriate, then I want no part of your propriety. He sat, the room was silent. Ryland caught Briar's eye, from where she stood in the corner, delivering Brennan's medicine, and winked. On day 51, Ryland found her in the herb garden. The king is lucky to have you, he said without preamble. Briar nearly dropped her basket. Thank you. I mean it. I've known Caspian since we were boys, and I've never seen him like this. Cursed and exhausted. Ryland smiled. Hopeful. That stopped her. He doesn't seem hopeful. He's fighting. That's hope enough. The beta's expression turned serious. Before you, he'd given up, was just waiting to die. Briar's chest tightened. I didn't do anything. You chose him. That's everything. On day 52, Isolde called her into the workroom. Again. Sit. Briar sat. Isolde poured tea, pushed a cup across the table. You're afraid. Not a question. Of what? That you're not enough, that you can't save him, that he'll die and it will be your fault. Briar's hand shook. How did you? Because I know you, Isolde said gently. You've spent your whole life trying to earn your place, trying to be useful, valuable, worth keeping. She leaned forward. But you can't earn worthiness, child. It's not a wage. It's a truth. What truth? That you are worthy simply because you exist. Tears pricked Briar's eyes. I don't feel worthy, hon. I know, but feelings lie sometimes. The truth remains. Isolde took her hand. You are not responsible for saving him. You are only responsible for loving him. There's a difference. What if love isn't enough? Then nothing is, and you'll have given him something beautiful anyway. We can't keep doing this, Ryland said. Standing in Caspian's office, where the king had just collapsed at his desk for the third time that week. The curse is tightening. The hollow is keeping you longer each night. Caspian rubbed his face. I know. Then do something about it. Like what? Ryland's gaze was steady. Complete the bond. Silence. A full mate bond might be strong enough to break the curse, or at least give you the strength to fight it. Caspian looked away. I won't use her like that. Use her, she's your mate. Exactly, which is why I won't bind her to me just to save myself. Even if it saves her too. That made Caspian pause, because the incomplete bond was hurting Briar too. Not as much as him, but enough. Talk to her, Ryland said quietly. At least give her the choice. That evening, Briar came to his chambers, as always, but Caspian was pacing. Agitated. What's wrong? He stopped, looked at her. The curse is getting worse. I know. Ryland thinks. He thinks completing the bond might help. Understanding dawned in her eyes. Oh, but I won't do that to save myself. It's not right. Briar crossed to him. What if I want to? You don't understand what you're asking. I understand perfectly. A mate bond is permanent, unbreakable. It ties us together. For life. Exactly, which is why I should choose it, not have it forced on me. She took his hand. Do you want me? Caspian's breath caught. Yes. Do you love me? A pause. Yes. Then what's the problem? I don't deserve you. Briar's smile was soft, sad. Then let me choose you anyway. Caspian couldn't sleep, which was ironic, given that sleep was the whole problem. But tonight he was too terrified to close his eyes, because Briar had said yes, to the bond, to him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapping her, condemning her to a life with a broken king and a curse that might never break. You're thinking too loud, Briar murmured from where she lay beside him. Sorry. Talk to me. He turned to face her, the firelight painting her skin gold. I'm afraid. Of what? That I'm being selfish, that I'm choosing what I want over what's best for you. Briar's hand found his cheek. What if they're the same thing? They're not. How do you know? Because you deserve better than... Stop. Her thumb pressed against his lips. Stop telling me what I deserve. I'm the only one who gets to decide that. She shifted closer until there was no space between them. I love you, she said simply. And all. Broken bits and all. I love you. Caspian's eyes burned. I don't know how to be what you need. You already are. I'm a disaster. You're my disaster. That startled a laugh out of him. That's a terrible selling point. I know, she grinned. But it's true. You're mine, and I'm yours, and the rest. We'll figure it out. What if we can't? Then we'll fail together, which is better than succeeding alone. Caspian pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and for the first time in 13 months, let himself hope. The mating was tender. That was the only word for it. Caspian had expected passion, heat, the frenzy that came with a mate bond snapping into place. But this was soft. They took their time, learning each other, hands and mouths, and whispered words. I love you. He said it against her skin, over and over, like a prayer, like absolution. I love you too. She answered every time. When he bit down on her shoulder, the mating mark, the bond flared to life between them. Golden and warm and so bright it hurt. She bit him back, and the bond completed, snapping into place like a lock turning. Caspian gasped, because he could feel her. Everything. Her love, her fear, her hope, the way she saw him, not as a broken king but as hers, worthy of love, worthy of forgiveness, worthy of rest. And for a moment, he believed it. They lay tangled together afterward, hearts beating in sync, bond humming between them. We did it, Briar whispered. We did. She pressed a kiss to his chest, right over his heart. I love you. I love you too. They fell asleep in each other's arms, peaceful, complete, whole. And when they woke, they were in the hollow, both of them, trapped deeper than ever before, the fog so thick they could barely see. And around them, the dead, closer now, watching, waiting. Leora stood at the center, smiling that terrible, sad smile. Welcome back, she said, and the fog closed in. The fog was alive. It moved with intention, pressing against Briar's skin like hands in the dark, cold and invasive and wrong. The air smelled of ash and grief and the absence of hope. Caspian, she called out, her voice swallowed almost immediately by the oppressive silence. This was never a nightmare, she realized with creeping horror. This was a prison, a cage built specifically to hold him, to break him, night after night after night. She found him on his knees in a clearing, if it could be called that, a space where the fog thinned just enough to see. Caspian, Briar rushed forward, her bare feet silent on the too soft ground. He was diminished in a way that made her heart stop. The man she knew, the king who commanded a room simply by entering it, the wolf whose presence was undeniable, was stripped away here. What remained was so utterly defeated it made her chest ache. She dropped to her knees beside him, reached for his face. Caspian, look at me, please. His eyes were fixed ahead, staring at something. Briar followed his gaze and her breath caught. Figures moved at the edge of the clearing, shapes with faces she didn't recognize. Soldiers in torn uniforms, civilians with wounds that would never heal, wolves in human form with eyes that reflected nothing but death. The dead won't leave you alone, she murmured, understanding settling over her like ice water. So much death. But of course, what did she expect from a war he was being haunted by thousands? They stood silent at first, then began to murmur. Their voices overlapped, creating a terrible chorus of accusation and sorrow that echoed through the fog. Some wept, some screamed, and Caspian just watched, like he couldn't bear to close his eyes. Come, Briar said, pulling at his hand. We have to get out of here. He didn't move. She felt his pain through the bond, a crushing wave of sorrow and guilt so profound it nearly dragged her under with him. Then the sorrow intensified, crystallized, focused. One figure stepped forward from the mass of dead, closer than the rest. A young woman, small, with gentle eyes and a wound in her chest that would never close. Blood stained the white cloth she clutched in her hands. Leora, Caspian murmured, and the name came out broken. Who is she? Briar asked, though she could feel his guilt and horror intensifying. Suddenly the bond flared, and she saw the young woman running toward their line, white cloth raised high, her face desperate and hopeful, trying to broker peace for her people. Someone shouting. Chaos. The terrible moment of hesitation that lasted too long. And then she was falling, the cloth still clutched in her hands, surprise and betrayal written across her face. Caspian holding her body afterward, horror seizing him as he realized what had happened, what he'd failed to prevent. I'm sorry, Caspian said to the ghost. She represented all the innocent lives lost. Briar understood. Every civilian casualty, every unavoidable tragedy, they all wore her face in his mind. Your Majesty, these are the casualties of war. Someone had told him in that memory, an advisor perhaps, trying to offer cold comfort. She was a person, Caspian had roared in reply. Briar's eyes filled with tears as she realized the full extent of what the curse did to him. It fed his sorrow. Worse, It fed his guilt, took the wound that wouldn't heal and poured poison into it every single night. The ghost, Leora, spoke. Her voice was soft, patient, almost kind, which made it so much worse. "You could have stopped it," she murmured to Caspian. "You should have seen me. A better king would have. This blood is on your hands." "No," Briar interrupted, shaking Caspian's arm. "It wasn't your fault. You went to war to protect your people, because Darius didn't accept peace while me. You did your best in a terrible situation." But even as she said it, she realized the horrible truth. These weren't the ghost's words. They were his. The curse had taken his guilt and given it a mouth, and every night it fed him the poison he already believed. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved," Isolde had told her. Briar watched Caspian's head dropping, his hands pressing flat against the yielding ground. She could feel him through the bond, and what she felt wasn't fear, it was agreement. He wasn't fighting the hollow, he was agreeing with it. "You think you deserve this," she whispered, horrified. "That's why the curse is growing. That's why you won't fight it. Because you think you deserve it." He did. She felt it now, clear and undeniable through their bond. He believed Leora's death, all their deaths, was a debt he hadn't finished paying. Briar didn't know what to do. She knelt beside him in the soft, wrong ground. "What happened to them?" "To you, it was awful," Briar murmured, her voice thick with tears. "It was awful, and you can't just forget. I get that. I'm sorry." Caspian's head lifted slightly. His eyes found hers, and they were raw, stripped of every defense. "She ran toward the line," he said. "She was carrying a white cloth. She was trying to surrender, and I did not see her in time." Briar's eyes filled with tears, feeling his guilt and shame at full force through the bond. "You were not enough to stop it," she said to Caspian, forcing the words out past the lump in her throat. "But no one could have been. That is not a failing. That is the truth of war. It doesn't say anything about you." She paused, then continued, her voice softer. "My parents abandoned me, and for so long I thought I deserved it. That if I'd been better somehow, they would have kept me. But that's not how it works." She looked at the ghosts surrounding them, then back at Caspian. "I deserve to move on from the past, to heal, and so do you. And so do they." Her gaze swept over the crowd of dead. "You're all trapped here, but you can let them go." Briar felt the tears on her face and didn't wipe them away. She reached out and took Caspian's hand, gripping it tightly. "Let her go," she said, her voice breaking. "Let them rest. You are allowed to put this down." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then something shifted in the fog, not physical, something deeper. The dead began to stir, one by one. They turned away from Caspian, their faces softening, the accusations fading from their lips. "I'm sorry," Caspian said again. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm sorry for all of it." The fog began to thin, just slightly, and the dead, one by one, dissolved into the gray, like breath into cold air. Their voices faded. Leora looked at Caspian one last time, and for a moment, just a moment, she smiled, a real smile, sad but forgiving. Then she was gone. But the fog didn't lift. If anything, it pressed in harder, and Briar realized this wasn't over. The curse pulled them apart. One moment Caspian's hand was in hers, the next, nothing. Caspian, Briar spun, but he was gone. The fog had swallowed him, and she was alone. Panic clawed at her throat. She ran, calling his name, but the hollow was changing, the ground beneath her feet shifting, and ahead, shapes emerging from the mist. Her ghosts, the parents who'd left her. But this time they looked different, older, tired, worn down by something Briar couldn't name. "You came back," her mother said. "We didn't think you would." Briar stopped. "What?" "We thought maybe you'd moved on, found peace," her father stepped forward. "But you're still here, still carrying us, still letting us define you." Briar's hands clenched. "You abandoned me." "We did." The simple admission knocked the air from her lungs. "Why?" Her mother's face crumpled. "We were young, scared, stupid. We thought we couldn't give you what you needed. So we left you somewhere we thought you'd be safe. And we've regretted it every day since. Briar shook her head. You're not real. You're just my guilt, my wound. Does it matter? Her father asked. Real or not, the pain is real. The question is real. What question? Are you going to keep carrying us, or are you going to let go? Briar's breath shuddered. I don't know how. Yes, you do, her mother said gently. You've already done it once, when you chose to believe you were worthy. Now you just have to keep choosing. Every day, every moment, until the choice becomes truth. The ghost began to fade. We're sorry, they said in unison, for what we did, for what we took from you. But you have to forgive us, not for our sake, for yours. And they were gone. Briar stood alone in the fog, racing pulse thrumming in her temples, and realized she could choose to hold on to the pain or release it. I forgive you, she whispered to the empty air. I forgive you, and I forgive myself. For believing I wasn't enough. The fog around her lightened, just a little, and ahead, she heard water, the black lake. Briar ran, the ground shifting beneath her feet, until she burst into another clearing and stopped. The lake stretched before her, black and still and terrifying, and in the center, Caspian. He was sinking, slowly, the water up to his chest now, his arms floating at his sides, his eyes closed. He'd given up. No, Briar breathed. She ran to the edge. Caspian. He didn't respond, didn't open his eyes, just kept sinking. Around the lake, the dead stood watching, silent. Waiting, Briar looked at them, then at Caspian, and made a choice. She stepped into the water. It was cold, so cold it stole her breath, and it pulled at her, trying to drag her under. But she kept moving, wading deeper, until the water was at her waist, her chest, her shoulders. Caspian. She reached him, grabbed his arm. His eyes opened, dull and empty. Let me go, he said. No. I deserve this. No, you don't? You don't understand. I understand everything, Briar said fiercely. I understand you're in pain, that you carry guilt that's crushing you. I also understand you're human, and humans make mistakes. Even kings. She pulled at him, trying to lift him, but he was so heavy, and the water was pulling them both down now. You have to fight, she gasped. I'm tired. I know, but you can't give up. Why not? Because I need you. That made him focus, really look at her. You'll be fine without me. No, I won't. The bond will kill me if you die. She saw the moment that registered, the horror that flooded his eyes. You shouldn't have bonded with me. Too late. I did. So now you're stuck with me, which means you have to live, for both of us. Caspian's hands came up, gripping her arms. I don't know how to let go. Then hold on to me instead. And she pulled, with everything she had. The water fought her, the curse fought her, but the bond burned bright and gold between them, and together, they broke the surface. They stumbled onto the shore, gasping, dripping, alive. The dead had moved closer, forming a circle around them, and at the center, Leora. She walked forward, slow and deliberate, until she stood right in front of Caspian. Why? She asked. Why what? Why do you punish yourself? Caspian's jaw clenched. Because I killed you. Did you turn? My soldiers did, under my command. In a war, Leora said, that you didn't start. I could have stopped it. Could you really? She tilted her head. You tried peace, Darius refused. You tried negotiation. He attacked. You gave him every chance. And he chose war. That doesn't absolve me. No, Leora agreed. It doesn't. Nothing will. She stepped closer. Because absolution isn't the point. Forgiveness is. I don't deserve. There it is again, Leora interrupted. That word, deserve. You don't get to decide what you deserve. That's not how forgiveness works. Caspian stared at her. Then how does it work? You choose it, even when you don't feel it, even when you think you don't deserve it. You choose to forgive yourself, not because you've earned it, but because holding on to guilt is killing you. She gestured to the dead around them. We're already gone. Our pain is over. But yours continues, and it doesn't honor us. It doesn't change what happened. It just keeps you trapped. Briar squeezed Caspian's hand. She's right. He looked at her. Then back at Leora. I don't know if I can. You don't have to know, the ghost said gently. You just have to try. She held out her hand, palm up. Let me go. Let us all go. Not because you've forgotten, but because you choose to remember without punishment. Caspian's breath shuddered, his eyes filled with tears, and slowly, so slowly, he reached out, placed his hand in hers. I'm sorry, he whispered. I know. I'll never forget you. Good, don't. But I forgive myself for being human, for making mistakes, for not being perfect. The moment the words left his mouth, something shifted. The air lightened. The fog began to lift. And Leora smiled, a real, full, beautiful smile. Thank you, she said, and dissolved into light. One by one, the other dead followed, fading, disappearing, until Caspian and Briar stood alone in a clearing that was no longer gray, but golden. The curse was breaking. They woke gasping, tangled together in Caspian's bed, the dawn light streaming through the windows. Real, solid, safe. Briar's hand was on Caspian's chest, feeling his heart pound. He was crying, silent tears streaming down his face. We're out, he breathed. We're free. Briar pulled him close, let him break apart in her arms, all the grief he'd been holding, all the guilt, pouring out of him in great shuddering sobs. She held him through it, whispering words of comfort, of love, until finally, the tears slowed, his breathing evened, and he pulled back to look at her. Thank you, he said. You don't have to thank me. I do. You saved me. We saved each other. He kissed her then, soft and grateful and full of wonder. I love you, he murmured against her lips. I love you too. They lay together in the quiet, the bond humming peacefully between them. For the first time in 13 months, Caspian felt, rested. The exhaustion was still there. It would take time to recover fully. But the crushing weight, the constant pull of the hollow, was gone. A knock sounded at the door. Your Majesty, Ryland's voice, cautious. Come in. The beta entered, took one look at them, and his face split into a grin. It's gone, isn't it? Caspian nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Ryland's eyes shone. Thank the gods. Word spread through the palace like wildfire. The king had slept, truly slept, for 8 hours straight. And when he'd emerged from his chambers, there was color in his face, light in his eyes, hope. The court didn't know about the curse, not really, but they knew something had changed. That afternoon, Caspian called a council meeting. Briar stood in the corner, where she always stood when delivering medicine. But this time, Caspian gestured for her to come forward. Sit with me, he said. The room went silent, every eye on her. Briar's heart raced, but she moved, sat in the chair beside the king's, and took his hand when he offered it. Many of you have wondered, Caspian began, his voice clear and strong, about my relationship with Briar Winterthorn. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some of you have speculated about the nature of our bond. He paused. I'm here to confirm those speculations. He looked at Briar. Briar is my mate, my queen, my partner. And I will not tolerate any disrespect toward her. More murmurs, louder now. Lord Halverton stood. Your Majesty, with all due respect, she's a foundling. She is, Caspian agreed, of unknown parentage, unknown bloodline. Also true. Hardly suitable for... Careful. Caspian's voice went cold. You're about to insult my mate, which I've just said I won't tolerate. Halverton paled, sat back down. Brennan stood. Your Majesty, if I may. Caspian nodded. Miss Winterthorn may be a foundling, but she's also the woman who saved our king. When all our medicine failed, when all our strategies failed, she succeeded. He looked around the room. And if that doesn't speak to her worth, her value, then I don't know what does. Isolde stepped forward from where she'd been standing by the door. I've known Briar since she was a babe, raised her, taught her, and I can say without hesitation, she is one of the finest people I've ever known. Royal blood or not, More council members stood, speaking in Briar's defense, telling stories of her kindness, her skill, her dedication. Briar's eyes burned because she'd never expected this acceptance, this belonging. Caspian squeezed her hand. "The matter is settled," he said. "Briar is my queen, and you will treat her as such." No one argued. In the days that followed, the kingdom learned their king had a queen. Wedding preparations began, but Caspian wanted something small, intimate, just close friends and trusted counsel. The ceremony took place in the palace chapel 3 months later. Isolde walked Briar down the aisle, mother and daughter in all but blood. When they reached the altar, where Caspian stood looking devastating in formal attire, his eyes shining, Isolde placed Briar's hand in his. "Take care of her," she whispered. "With my life," Caspian promised. The vows were simple, traditional promises of love and loyalty, partnership and devotion. When it came time for personal vows, Caspian went first. "Briar, you came into my life when I'd given up, when I thought I was beyond saving, and you didn't save me. You showed me how to save myself. You chose me when I didn't deserve it, and I will spend the rest of my life choosing you back. I love you in this life and whatever comes after." Briar's turn. "Caspian, you taught me that worthiness isn't earned, that love isn't a wage, it's a gift. You showed me that broken things can be beautiful, that scars tell stories, and stories matter. I choose you, today and every day, in darkness and in light. I love you." The officiant pronounced them married, and when Caspian kissed her, the crowd erupted in cheers. The celebration afterward was joyful. Music and dancing and laughter. Briar danced with everyone who mattered. Rylan, Brennan, Isolde. Finally, she danced with her husband, the words still strange and wonderful on her tongue. "Happy?" he asked, deliriously. "Good," he pulled her closer, "because I plan to keep you that way for the rest of our lives." The transition wasn't easy. Being queen meant responsibility, meetings and decisions and public appearances. But Briar found her footing. She opened an orphanage for foundlings like herself, children who needed a home, a place to belong. She taught healing classes, passing on what Isolde had taught her, and she stood beside Caspian as he rebuilt what the war had broken. The nightmares came back sometimes, but they were different now, less consuming, more manageable. And when they came, Briar was there to hold him, to remind him that he'd forgiven himself, and that was enough. Months passed. The kingdom healed, slowly but surely, and so did Caspian. The shadows beneath his eyes faded. The hollows in his cheeks filled out. He laughed more, smiled easier, slept peacefully through the night, every night, on the anniversary of their mating. Caspian took Briar to the war memorial, where names were carved in stone, hundreds of them, including Lyora's. He placed flowers at the base, as he did every week. "I'll never forget," he said quietly. "I know, but I'm learning to forgive." "I know that too." He turned to her. "Thank you for helping me learn." Briar took his hand. "We learned together." They stood in silence, honoring the dead, then walked home, together, 1 year later. Briar woke to golden morning light and the feeling of Caspian's hand on her stomach, where the small curve of their child grew, 3 months along. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep. "Morning." She turned in his arms, studied his face. The peace there, the contentment. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Like the dead." She swatted him. "Too soon." He laughed, caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "I slept perfectly, as I do every night, thanks to you. Thanks to us." "Fair." He shifted so his hand covered hers on her stomach. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Terrified." "Me too. But we'll figure it out, together. We'll probably make mistakes, definitely. But we'll love them, fiercely. And that will be enough." Briar smiled. "Yeah, it will." They lay together in comfortable silence, the bond humming peacefully between them, warm and golden and whole. Outside, the kingdom woke, preparing for another day. In the infirmary, Isolde taught a new class of apprentices in the council chambers. Rylan reviewed reports. In the orphanage, children laughed and played. And in the royal chambers, the king and queen held each other, not because they had to, but because they chose to. Every morning, every night, every moment in between, Caspian pressed a kiss to Briar's forehead. I love you. I love you too. Thank you for choosing me, always. They drifted back to sleep, peaceful, complete, free. The curse had ended, but their love was just beginning. Some curses break, some loves last. This was both, and it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.